Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 2, which is the final part of my December wrap-up. As I mentioned in part 1, which I will link below, I read a lot of books in December, but some of them I can't talk to you about for various reasons, so only a 2-part wrap-up this month. I will link part 1, as I mentioned. I will also put content warnings and links to all the people and videos I mentioned. So the first book I finished next was Over the Woodward Wall by A. Deborah Baker, which is one of the pen names for Sean McGuire, which I think might also be a pen name for Mira Grant. This is sort of a weird series to explain because, like, apparently in Middle Game, there is, like, a book series that the main characters love, and this is that book series. I have no interest in reading Middle Game, but this series did appeal to me. It's a portal fantasy. We're following our main characters, Avery and Zib, who one day on their way home from school, they climb a wall. There's a wall that is like right in the middle of their street and they can't get back home, so they climb the wall and find themselves in this world called the Up and Under. And Avery and Zib are sort of neighbors, but they've never really met or interacted before. They're very different people. Zib and her family, like her parents, are very like free-spirited and kind of like artsy, and Avery and his parents are much more like straight-laced and like ordinary kind of. So the two of them are very different people, but they end up having to rely on each other as they explore this weird world and get into danger there, meet some other characters along the way, and try to figure out how to get home. This was a very interesting book. Very mixed bag for me. I am excited to continue the series, but this was, yeah, there's definitely some pluses and minuses for me. For one thing, I think that maybe this book suffered a little bit for me reading it at the same time that I'm reading the Fairyland series by Catherine M. Valente, because they have some kind of surface similarities, but I think the Fairyland series does things better, or does things in a way that I enjoy more. They're both portal fantasies, and they both kind of explore similar ideas about like the real cost of fairy tales and kind of like growing up and everything. But I feel like those are done better in Fairyland series, and also I feel like the friendships and the characterization is a lot better, and I like the writing more. That said though, I did enjoy some things about this, which I'll talk about at the end. But one thing that frustrated me throughout this book is I really loved Avery and I really felt for him. I connected to him a lot more than Zib. And even though I definitely enjoyed Zib, I really liked her and I really cared about her, she really felt like a version, like a middle grade version of a manic pixie dream girl, and that got very grating. And I also really didn't like the way that the narrative seemed to kind of be trying to force us to care, not to care about Zib more, but like to view Zib as the more interesting character or the better character. And this is now the second series that I have read from Sean McGuire where like I'm enjoying it and I enjoy the characters, but she kind of sets up this world or this situation where like there's no real right answer and there's complexities and like nobody is really right and nobody is really wrong. Like, it seems like that's what she's trying to do, but then she kind of ruins it by being like, actually, there is a right answer. Here's the character that you're supposed to like more. And I personally just don't like that. Yeah, like, I really liked Avery a lot more than the book seemed to. And even though there were some moments that felt like it was putting him on more of an equal footing with Zib as a character, overall, it definitely felt like Zib was supposed to be like the main character. And as I keep saying, I did not like that, even though I did enjoy Zib in her own right as well. Also, the writing kind of varied for me. Like, there were some parts that I think it was really like fun and engaging and quirky in a good way, and then there were also a lot of parts where it felt like it was trying too hard. I also just didn't find the like plot as engaging as I wanted to, and I also think that the characters that they sort of meet along the way also felt a little forced in their quirkiness. Which is funny because in most of the Fairyland books I've read so far, you could make that argument there too, but I didn't feel like that, whereas here I did. Like, there was like a bird girl they meet who like I liked, but I don't know, she felt almost generic in her quirkiness, which is a weird thing to say, but yeah, I did really enjoy some of the characters they met. Like, there were several owls who I got very attached to. And I also did really love the friendship between Avery and Zib that they're like developing and like learning to rely on each other. I really loved that. That already is like really getting me in my heart, and I'm excited to see that explored further in later books. And I also really like some of the ideas and themes this book handles, especially about like kids with differences and the way that like adults see kids and like the things that children are capable of, or that are like that kids can think about that adults don't think they do. And then another thing about the plot is like there were some settings or moments that I did really enjoy, but then there were some parts that the characters' decisions felt pretty inexplicable to me, except for like, okay, time to move to the next plot point. So I didn't love that. So as you can see, this was like a very mixed bag for me. It's somewhere between 3 and 3.5 stars. As I said, I did enjoy a lot of things about it, and I am looking forward to continuing the series, but yeah, this didn't blow me away. Oh, and I also want to mention that I listened to part of this book as audio, and the narrator was Heath Miller, and I think he did a really fantastic job. Like, he's I believe a British, like a UK narrator, and he had some of the best American accents for the characters that I have ever heard a non-American person have. So I just wanted to mention that I think he did a really great job, including the accents. Next, I finished The Beast and the Enchantress by Camille Peters. This is another novella in the A Villains Ever After series. I won't go through the whole thing describing that series because I just talked about it recently, but this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and the twist on this is that the main character is the Enchantress who curses the Beast, and they are the ones who have a romance. And this was a buddy read with my friend Julia from Shakespeare and Such. I think she actually DNF'd it because we both felt that this was like astonishingly middle of the road. Like as we were saying, like I think I described it to Julia at one point that like this is the most 3-star book to ever 3-star, because it was just fine. Like it did not offend me or frustrate me in any way. Well, that's not true. There were a couple frustrating things, but like it was not bad. I didn't have a bad time reading it. There were parts I liked. I don't regret reading it, but it was just very nothing for me. So as I said, we are following our main character Astrid, who is the Enchantress, and she ends up cursing the prince because like she's getting revenge for something that she thinks he did to her sister. He basically like rejects her, and she sees him as being very like selfish and not treating people well, and so she curses him because of that. But the curse doesn't really go the way she plans, and it ends up cursing her as well, which I thought was a very interesting element. And she ends up disguising herself. She doesn't really plan to start doing this, but what ends up happening is she disguises herself, so the Beast doesn't actually know who she is, that she's like the Enchantress who cursed him, so the two of them end up getting a lot closer and falling in love, but of course he doesn't know who she is, and she's still trying to break the curse on him, especially because as she gets to know him better, she starts realizing maybe she judged him too harshly, and yeah, this was fine. This was a book. I did enjoy actually the magic elements a lot. I thought those were interesting. I ended up really liking Rosemarie actually, who is Astrid's sister. She was a really fun side character. She was kind of carrying the book at one point. She was the only one who seemed to be like making sense for a while. As I said, there were some elements of the curse that I found really interesting, and especially the way the curse was used, it sort of made Astrid the Beast character as well. And I did like some of the takes on the Beauty and the Beast story, but yeah, overall, I just was not very engaged in this book. I thought the romance was very cheesy in the way it was written. I thought the characters' motivations sometimes didn't make very much sense, including for like really big decisions that happen in the book. Their just motivations, I think, were very poorly done or poorly explained. Also, as I mentioned, Astrid could be very frustrating, especially the way that we had to watch her realize and unrealize the same things over and over. Like, this is a very short book, and so it baffles me why it was so repetitive, and also why we spent so much time on the setup of the curse at the beginning. I also want to mention that the way the curse was described, was like overreacting at best and ableism at worst. I didn't like the way that was handled either. So yeah, this was just very mediocre for me. I gave The Beast and the Enchantress 3 stars. I have actually enjoyed several of the ones I've read in this series. I just happened to pick a couple lately that I'm not liking as much. Next, I finished Queen of the Tiles by Hannah Alkaf. I am so glad I finally got to this book after putting it on several TBRs. This was one of my most anticipated releases, and I absolutely loved this. Spoiler alert, I guess, because I haven't summarized it yet, but I thought this was fantastic. This is a kind of contemporary mystery thriller, and it deals a lot with grief. We're following our main character Najwa, and her and her best friend Trina were Scrabble players. They were big competitors, and a year ago they were at a tournament where Trina mysteriously dropped dead, just like in the middle of a game, and nobody really knows what happened or why. And Najwa is obviously devastated by losing her best friend, so she's still very much grieving, and this is the first time now that she is going back to a Scrabble tournament since that happened. So this is a year later, and she is obviously already dealing with a lot, but then somebody starts using Trina's social media accounts again and dropping hints that maybe there was foul play there, that maybe Trina was actually murdered, and so Najwa ends up trying to figure out like the truth about what happened to her best friend. And yeah, I loved this. I thought this was fantastic. Hannah Alkaf is like officially an auto-buy author for me. I just love the way that she writes and the kinds of stories she tells. It also seems like she tends to write about grief a lot, and she does it in a way that I find so moving and so thoughtful. I love the way this book handled that and the messiness of grief and the different ways of healing and different ways people deal with that. And I love how even though Trina, we never see her in the present, obviously, because she has already died, but like her presence is so strong, and the way we get to know more about her and Najwa's friendship, I thought was so effective. And especially as we see Najwa like learning more about Trina and like what their friendship was like, I just thought that was really well done. I found this an incredibly compelling mystery. I don't read a ton of mysteries, but I'm finding that I can really love when there's sort of the framework for a book that talks about other things. You know, like this book deals a lot with grief and friendship. And I found this incredibly gripping. Like, I'm not a big mystery thriller reader, so if you are, maybe that wouldn't be the case for you. But yeah, I think I read this all in one night. I could not stop reading it. I had to know what was going on and what would happen. I also loved Najwa as a main character. She is like so smart and funny and like self-deprecating, but also like very like compassionate and loving. And I just really loved her. I found some of the side characters really interesting as well, and especially the way that your expectations or first impressions of them are sometimes true and sometimes not. And I also think that the messy like friendships and relationships here were communicated really well and just explored very well. The only thing that I didn't love about this is I had kind of mixed feelings about the ending and the solution. There were some parts I really liked and some parts that felt like a letdown to me personally, but overall I thought this was brilliant. I'm so glad I finally read it, and I gave Queen of the Tiles 4.5 stars. Next, I read Magic, Once Upon a Faraway Land by Mirel Ortega. This is, of course, a picture book, and Mirel Ortega is one of my favorite illustrators. I really love her work that I've seen elsewhere, so when I heard that she was coming out with her own picture book that she wrote and illustrated, I knew I wanted it and I wanted to read it. And this is a kind of like autobiographical story about Mirel growing up on her family's pineapple farm. And I really enjoyed this. There's not a lot to say, obviously, because it's so short, but I thought the illustrations were beautiful. I loved the family relationships and the like strong sense of place that you get and like the ideas of home and magic. Yeah, I thought this was really lovely, and I gave Magic 4 stars. Next, I finished A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum by Emma Southen. I can't remember the subtitle, but it's something about murder in ancient Rome. This is a nonfiction book that I absolutely loved. I will say right off the bat, I can see that there are some things about it that maybe other people wouldn't like. The writing style and the kind of like humor used, I think is something that will really rub some people the wrong way, and I totally understand that. There have been nonfiction books where I felt like that about the way that the humor or the conversational tone was used, but for me it really worked. Like, not only did I just find this genuinely really engaging and interesting and Emma Southen's writing very funny, but I really appreciated that even though she was like, she could be very like funny and flippant about some things, the parts that were very serious, the parts where she was talking about what this loss would actually mean for people, she was very genuine and she was very compassionate, and that's something that I really value and appreciate in nonfiction. I personally do not believe that, first off, I don't believe that historians can be truly neutral about what they're talking about. Like, I don't think anybody can truly have no feelings about what they're like learning or doing, but also, in addition to that, I think to pretend that you are is not only dishonest, but is actually like harmful and undesirable. Like, I think that we actually need to be upfront about the fact that we can talk about history when we should talk about cultural context, but it doesn't make you a good historian or a good nonfiction writer to pretend that you don't have any feelings or responses or thoughts about what you're communicating. I think it's good to be clear about how you're separating those, you know, when you're like interpreting a story in a certain way, or when you are talking about your reaction to something versus how it would have been viewed at the time. I think it's important to be clear about that, but I think both pieces matter. So I just feel very strongly about that. That's something I think I've probably talked about that on this channel before, but yeah, there's some people probably who are going to read this and think that she has too many reactions to what she's talking about. I personally didn't. So anyway, this book is about murder in ancient Rome, and specifically about like the concept and like how people's death was treated when it was like a killing, you know, when it was murder, and how that worked in a something that was a slave state and something where, you know, like women were property and like lower class people were considered property. Again, you know, slavery, how that fits into this, how you can have a concept of murder in a civilization where there's also like gladiator fights, and also how they sometimes didn't even have a concept of murder, and how that differs from societies today. And also a lot about like murder in politics and how that affected like Rome and how it wasn't really a republic. And I just found this incredibly fascinating. I tend to like historical nonfiction from this time period, and I especially like this kind where it talks about like here is the information and here is why it is interesting and important, and also here is why like it affects us on a personal level. And I think she did a really great job of not like overstating her premise. Like at no point is she trying to convince us that because of the way Romans did things, we do things this way today. She's just talking about the fact that like so much of our culture, like Western culture, really like idolizes ancient Rome, and there are some things that we have like carried over from them and the cultural stories that we find important. And she talks about what that means, and or what that could mean when you are talking about a society that does the things that they did. And I thought that was really well done. I really liked her writing style. It's very clear and very compelling, and again, there is a lot of humor in it, but I also think that she pulls back on that when it's appropriate. And I also think that this is, even though this is very engaging nonfiction, it would probably be considered popular nonfiction. The research and the information is so good and so thorough, and she's obviously very good at what she does and she knows what she's talking about. Like, this is still a nonfiction book. Nonfiction does not have to be boring. It does not have to be dry, and I think that this book is a great example of how you can have something that is engaging, that is even funny, and yet is still very, very good research and very good nonfiction, and that does teach you a lot. I also really like the way that she addresses some like common like myths or misconceptions about ancient Rome, some of which I did not know about, so I found that really interesting. And as I said, I really appreciated that she did not pretend that she did not have a response to the things that she was talking about, which I think, in addition to all the other things I already said about how I think it is honest and desirable, you know, to like acknowledge that you have a perspective on what you're talking about, but also I think it made a lot of sense for the subject matter because she's talking about murder and loss and grief. Like, of course, people in the ancient world would have had emotional responses about these things as well, and she does talk about that. As I said, she really talks about like what these topics, this information means in a society that enslaved people, in a society that mistreated anyone of a lower class, that mistreated women. Like, she talks about the concept of murder and who that applies to and who that doesn't. Yeah, I just thought this was really, really fantastic. One of my favorite nonfiction books I read this year. As I said, I can see it not working for a lot of people. I can see the tone being off-putting or the humor being too much. There are other books where I have felt like that, but this one didn't do that for me. I just thought it was really fantastic, and I'm very excited to read Emma Southland's other book, which I was gifted by my friend Mary Margaret, so yeah, I can't wait to read that. And I gave A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum 5 stars. Also have to mention what a fantastic title that is. I just think that's brilliant. She credits like one of her friends, I think, who came up with the title, so I just think that's great. Next, I finished Rilke's Book of Hours, Love Poems to God, translated by Anita Barrows and Joanna Macy. And the original poetry is by Rainer Maria Rilke, which was in German. And yeah, I loved this. I have read excerpts of these poems in a different collection before that I loved, and so I think this is the full collection. I think Rilke is officially one of my favorite poets, and it is always so difficult to like describe poetry or just describe why you love it or what you love it or even like what it's about. A lot of this poetry is about like love and like the divine and like the impossibility of articulating or understanding that. I feel like I maybe will need to do like a separate mini review on this. Because I just found it incredibly beautiful and moving, and like the way that he can use simple and yet complex like language and like structure is just incredible to me. And I just think this was really, really beautiful. Let me like read a section. Like, I really love this poem, and I think it's a fairly good example of the collection. We must not portray you in king's robes, you drifting mist that brought forth the morning. Once again from the old paint boxes we take the same gold for scepter and crown that has disguised you through the ages. Piously we produce our images of you till they stand around you like 1,000 walls, and when our hearts would simply open, our fervent hands hide you. So just the idea of like the imperfect humans trying to describe or encounter or communicate things about God and the divine, and yeah, I just think that's really beautiful. I think he communicates that with an amazing amount of clarity and beauty at the same time. I gave Rilke's Book of Hours 5 stars. I am still struggling to talk about it, but I loved it. Next, I finished Stolen Mayfly Bride by Sarah K. L. Wilson. This is in the Stolen Brides of the Fae series, which is another one of those indie fantasy series that are not connected, but they're like they have a similar concept and they're all by different authors. And in this one, we are following our two main characters, Elkanah and Vidar. Elkanah is what is known as the Mayfly Seer. I believe she used to be a human, but then she was like taken away and kind of like ritually drowned and put in a cage, and now she is the Mayfly Seer. So she's like a prophetess basically, and she only wakes up like for one day out of every month, I think, when she can receive petitions and all of that, or maybe it's every year. Yeah, one day a year actually. And then Vidar is a fairy lord, I think, who ends up like using her expertise, and he keeps returning to her for her help. And he eventually starts like getting very bothered by the fact that she is trapped here. And even though Fae don't really have these kinds of emotions, he starts to have them anyway, I guess. And so it is about a romance between them as well. And I did enjoy this, but I didn't love it. I gave it 3.5 stars, so I did quite like it. But I just think that I wanted more from the romance development, and I wanted to see more character development for Vidar, especially the kind of person he is at the beginning. I just don't think we had enough time to understand how he had changed, and even though there were some great moments between them, and I liked some of their interactions, I just think that the romance could have been a lot more effective if we had spent more time on it, and like if they had had more interactions, and if Vidar's character development would have been more of a focus. Like I do think that the time skips helped with some of that character and romance development in the way that it just made me like, I don't know, more forgiving of it, but I still think it could have been better. But I did really love the ending and the way that played out. And as I said, I did enjoy this, just not quite as much as the other things I've read from this author. And I gave Stolen Mayfly Bride 3.5 stars. And then finally, the last book that I read in 2022 was The Wishing Thread by Lisa Van Allen. This was actually a birthday present from my wonderful friend Huck at Badger Reads. This was a birthday present a couple years ago, and I finally read it, and I really enjoyed this. This was such a lovely, cozy way to finish my reading year. So this is a kind of like contemporary with a little bit of fantasy element in it. I was thinking that it reminded me of the way people describe Sarah Addison Allen's books, and then I found out that Lisa Van Allen is actually like, I think her daughter or her daughter-in-law or something, so that's very cool. And this is set in a small town, and we are following 3 grown-up sisters. The Van Ripper sisters, who are Aubrey, Betty, and Maggie. Aubrey is the one who is still like living in this town. She lives at the stitchery with their aunt or great aunt Mariah, who is kind of the matriarch of the family, and she's the one who runs the stitchery, which is a really rundown yarn shop, but that also like kind of their real business is that they will knit spells for people, but they're very quiet about it. Like everyone in the town kind of knows but doesn't really know that this happens. So there is just like this little bit of magic in the book, like this kind of splash of knitting magic, which is something I love, you guys know. I'm also a knitter, and so that was one of my favorite parts about this book by far, was just the use of knitting, the way that combined with magic, and just the love and appreciation and respect for knitting. So anyway, so Aubrey is the one who lives at the stitchery with Mariah, and then when Mariah dies very suddenly, she's the one who inherits the stitchery. The subject turns out that that's not exactly what happened, and that her and her sisters will kind of have to come together and work together. And they've been separated for a long time. They haven't been close for a while, and so Biddy and Maggie end up coming into town for the funeral and everything, and trying to figure out what to do from there. And Biddy, she's dealing with a lot in her family life, and then Maggie has kind of always been a wanderer, always roaming, and she never really stays in one place very long. And so these 3 sisters have to kind of learn to get along with each other again, and to try to figure out like what to do, how they can save the stitchery, because it looks like it's going to be closed down because they are trying to demolish like the neighborhood that the stitchery is in. And yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed this. There were parts of the main story and the main characters that were frustrating, but for some reason I just didn't mind. I think I was just so enjoying like the feel of this book and the knitting elements, the way that that was used so casually in the story, but also that it was such an important part of the story that I kind of overlooked some of the things that might normally bother me. Like even though like I really loved Aubrey, she was my favorite of the main characters. I really felt for her and I wanted her to be happy. Maggie and Biddy could be kind of frustrating in their own ways, especially Maggie. But I do understand why they were the way that they were, and I think that the way the story ultimately came together, I think, fixed a lot of that for me, and I loved the growing closeness between these sisters. There's like this one scene where they all kind of come together to help one of them, and I loved that so much. I also really loved the like very small romance plot in this for Aubrey. His name is Vic, and he is like the sweetest. Like I love him. He's just like so kind and good. It's just a really, really sweet romance, and I really liked that. Oh, I also want to mention that I ended up really loving Biddy's two children, Nessa and Carson. They're not like prominent characters in the book, but I really liked the way they were written, and I think they were very well written kid characters in a book centering on the adults, if that makes sense. And I especially really loved where Nessa's storyline went and like some of the things that she did and the way that she kind of like took charge when she needed to. I really loved Nessa. I also really liked thematically the way this book talks about grief and about again, you know, knitting and also magic, and how is something like, can something still be magic if it doesn't work all the time, and like sacrifice and everything. I thought this was a really interesting book, even though there were some of the plot things, like some of the conflict that frustrated me and some of the character things. Overall, I still really enjoyed what this book did. And like I've been saying, I think just one of the biggest things I loved about this was the way it used knitting and the way it handled knitting. And so I think that was one of the things that made me really enjoy this when maybe other people wouldn't have enjoyed that part as much. I don't know. And I want to just read one of the sections in this book, like one of the in-between chapter sections, because I feel like this encapsulates one of the things I loved most about this book, which is of course the love for knitting, but like the respect for it and for women's work. You guys know that's something I love, so I thought this would be a nice way to finish this wrap-up. From the great book in the hall. There are times when it will be critical to know how to knit quickly. Early knitters in the British Isles developed methods of knitting for an economy of movement. The smaller the motion, the quicker the stitch. They threaded their yarn in their left hands, to work fast by the light of a fire in a winter hearth. This was functional knitting to bring in money. Knitting that fed children, paid doctors, patched fences. Human as machine. Some people have said that when factories began to erode the work done by cottagers, yarn-holding techniques shifted. The highborn lady did not knit for income. She knit for leisure. She knit at tea time in sunbright parlors. She exchanged patterns with friends. And so she held her yarn in her right hand, not her left. A choice that forced her hands to swoop and loop beautifully for each stitch. A choice that distinguished her from the calloused and bone-sore farm women who knit so fast and crudely for their bread. We women of the stitchery today, we have always learned to knit with both hands. Not because one hand is better than the other, because each hand has its advantages. We knit for speed. We knit for gratification. We knit because we must. Either way. I gave The Wishing Thread 4 stars. It was just a perfect, cozy way to finish off my reading year. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!